Hello everyone, welcome to my YouTube channel where we do painting tutorials. For this watercolor pencils landscape, I start by taping down my paper with masking tape so it stays flat, and I begin by applying phthalo blue to the sky. So that's the entire upper half of my page, and I focus it mostly on the top right beneath the tape. That way I get a bit of a gradient going on, so it's more saturated on the top and less on the bottom. Then I take my cup of water and my watercolor brush and I start blending from light to dark, so from the horizon, from that middle point upwards towards where I applied the blue a bit thicker. I go left to right using horizontal motions, that way I get a pretty smooth sky, and while it is still wet I crumple my kitchen paper sheet and I randomly tap on the page to create some very soft clouds in the sky. Then I clean my brush rather thoroughly and I leave it to dry on the napkin. While the sky dries, I take some Venetian red and I color that path we have going on the lower half of the painting, and I apply also some of my phthalo blue on top of the Venetian red. That way it gets a bit more on the lavender brownish side instead, and I also add a slight amount of cadmium orange to neutralize the blue. Then I take my watercolor brush, and with not too much water, I just start blending following the direction of the path. So I go from where it's the tiniest, where it's the most narrow, towards on the bottom right corner where it's closest to us. At that point, my sky had pretty much dried up, so I take again that phthalo blue Venetian red mix and I color a tiny mountain right beneath the sky with those colors, and with barely any water on my brush, I go over them just enough to activate and smooth it down. Because it's far up in the distance, so you won't really be able to see much of the texture or what's going on. Then I take my earthy green and I color literally everything else with it. So I do that field where we are going to have a tree sitting up in the center, and also the bottom left field as well. I'm using these kind of diagonal motions going alongside the path because that is our perspective for this painting, so I'm going to follow that diagonal direction. I use horizontal motions for the sky because the sky is always parallel to the earth, if that makes any sense. But for this we're standing on the side of the path and we have a bit of a perspective going on. So I just apply it rather thickly because I want to do this in one big layer rather than having to build up several ones. And I also apply some phthalo blue here and there, some more green and a bit of that cat orange. Then I take my helium blue reddish, which is my darkest blue, and I outline the edges of the grassy fields that are closest to that pathway. I add some orange to the one we have on the bottom. And then I just blend everything following again the direction of the pencil marks. I blend from light to dark, so from my earthy green towards that helium blue mix I apply it on the path, I clean my brush, and then I do the other side of the field. It's perfectly fine if you get some weird lines or maybe some bits that are darker and some bits that are lighter, or you still can see some of the pencil grain showing through the paint. It's perfectly fine. Some texture is always helpful when painting nature that is closer to us. So don't strive to make this 100% smooth. We don't need that for this. Once everything has dried, especially the sky, I take my earthy green and I color the tree crown with it. I'm just doing a base layer for the tree crown, and I'm going to add highlights and shadows. I'm using orange for a highlight because I want the sun to be coming from the direction of the path where it's the most narrow, so the top left corner. And the shadows are going to be in the opposite direction, so towards the right and the bottom right. For those places, I apply just some of my Helio Blue, which is my darkest blue. Then I take my watercolor brush with barely any water on it and I start activating the tree crown with a tapping motion, going from light to dark, so from the orange towards the green and then the blue. This is one of my favorite techniques for painting with watercolor pencils because it builds up some really easy texture, which is just helpful for landscapes overall. It's just a very easy technique that gives very pretty results in my opinion. While it dries, I take my walnut brown, which I have sharpened to a nice fine point, and I draw out the tree trunk and the branches with it. I'd forgotten that little piece of the tree crown on the right side, so just quickly do that one as well with some green and blue. Then I take some Helio Blue and I apply it to the right side of the tree trunk, again because we have the shadows on the right side, and I also add a very small hint of black. While that dries, I go back to my walnut brown and I draw out some tinier trees behind the big one with some random shapes. Maybe some are straight lines, maybe some have V-shaped trunks, it doesn't really matter. And then I go over them with the earthy green for a base, orange for a highlight on the top left, and then a shadow with dark blue on the bottom right. That is all we are going to be doing throughout this painting. It's very simple once you get the hang of it. I also add a tiny tree right there on the pathway, and I add some random hints of orange on my grassy field. If drawing is not your thing, there is going to be a traceable to this and many other paintings over at my Patreon page, Sunshine Arts, and by doing so you also help support me and the channel. And like always, all of the supplies used and the reference picture will be linked down below in the description box. Back to us, I take my Helio Blue and a bit of the orange and I draw the shadows beneath all of those trees on the bottom right side of each and every one of them. Then my camera skipped, but I basically just outlined that pathway on the bottom with some more of the Helio Blue and I'm just tapping over it to activate it. I'm tapping over instead of going in big brush strokes left to right because you guessed it, it adds texture and this is a dirt path. It does not have to be absolutely smooth. While everything else dries, I take my walnut brown and I sketch on this fence. Very simple, just keep in mind that the poles that are closest to us are going to be in wider distances apart from each other, and the distances are going to, and the poles are going to get tinier and tinier as they go away from us towards the trees, because that's how perspective works. Then with my dark blue, I just sketch a shadow area behind them for their own shadow that is being casted, and then go lightly with some more dark blue and walnut brown under the trees, and then I quickly activate that with my brush. I'm going to do some quick touch-ups on the trees, adding more of my orange and green because some of the parts dried a bit too light, so I'm just going to quickly fix those up. I add a bit more shadows between the division of the crown where the top of one branch ends and the other one starts with the blue. I'm basically just outlining them and that is it. I'd like to give a very special thank you to my Patreon supporters for the month of May and thank you all for watching. We'll see each other in the next video. Bye bye!